welcome to 3 Count Commentary. So let's talk about Who Killed WCW Episode 2, which focused on Goldberg's push, Kevin Nash with the book, and Eric Bischoff getting fired. So last time, I basically went on a rant saying that Eric Bischoff is not responsible for the death of WCW, and that anybody who is paying attention knows that it was the executives within Warner Brothers Discovery. That has not changed. But since I have to talk about the episode, let's talk about how terrible your boy Kevin Nash looked in that episode. And let's talk about Kevin Nash needing to get some of the blame for his booking during this time. Now, they talked about Goldberg. Now, of course, they talked about Goldberg. He was picked to be the top star, not only because he was super over, but Brad Siegel personally liked Goldberg because he was sort of a more marketable guy for families. They wanted to change the demographic of WCW. And because they wanted to change the demographics, they wanted to move away from the NWO and some of the more crass things they were doing and move towards more centered around Goldberg, because Goldberg was a draw for children, and that was the plan. Well, a lot of people bitched and complained about that. And ultimately, due to Bill's inexperience, due to his rough style, and due to the fact that he was a dominating babyface, they decided to take the belt off of him after only a few months after winning it from Hogan. This decision was, they blamed Kevin Nash. Now, Kevin Nash was not the head booker yet. Kevin Nash was made the booker in January of 1999, and he was part of the booking committee from January of 99 to October of 99. So about 8 or 9 months. Okay. Before that, he was just a guy who Bischoff bounced ideas off of, and sometimes he would give ideas. So he pitched himself to beat Goldberg, and they tried to rationalize it a little bit by saying, of anybody on the roster, who is the most believable to beat Goldberg? Well, Nash is big, Nash is over. Of course, Nash will be the guy. And you know what? I honestly do not disagree with that. Then they argued about Goldberg. How should he lose? Kevin Sullivan wanted him to get beat 1, 2, 3 clean in the middle of the ring. Other people had other ideas, and they went with the other idea. The other idea, of course, being the taser. Then from there, of course, we get the finger poke of doom, and we're downhill from there. Now, Kevin Nash looked awful in this episode. Specifically, when he talked about the downslope of WCW, he said that his check didn't change. Because in Kevin Nash's mind, he only really cared about himself. Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan are both extremely selfish individuals. And they are probably the two guys that, if you want to blame talent, are the two most obvious guys you want to blame for the creative downfall of WCW. Hogan had creative control, while Nash was the head booker. Now, he claims that in the book Nitro, because I suggest everybody just read Nitro, that he really only had full control, for one episode of Thunder, which aired January 21st of 1999, and that it was booking committee every show since. And his last episode of booking as being the head of the creative committee was October the 14th, 1999. He mentioned in the book that he was paid $400,000 to $500,000 to book, and he ended up booking himself into a retirement angle near the end, and sort of gloated in the book that he, booked himself into the best job because he got to sit and do commentary while getting paid a ton of money. And again, just callous in the way that he didn't really care about the company. Now, in the book Nitro, they did a really good job of telling the story that I said again in episode 1. Kevin Nash really did not want to be in WCW in the first place. It is outlined quite well in the book Nitro. In chapter 13, Nash says that Vince McMahon was like a father to him because without Diesel, he wouldn't be in WCW in the first place. Vince McMahon was the first person to see anything in him and was the guy who pushed him. So he said that this man was like a father to him. He didn't want to leave WCW. So when you see that Kevin Nash is talking very callously in the book, in various documentaries and interviews, and there was WCW documentaries in the past where Kevin Nash says that the company was just an ATM. He was just there for the money. And even in this very documentary, in episode 1, he says the WWE is the show. WCW was just money. That was it. Kevin Nash is one of the villains that people are, they like Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash is a straight shooter. He's not hiding from you that he didn't really give a shit about WCW. All right. But it's because he's not hiding it from you that you're not looking for it. You're not hearing it as he's telling you. He didn't care about the company. He cared about himself. He was there because he was one of the lowest drawing WWF champions and he wasn't making any money. So he left for the money and ended up making more money than he had ever even thought possible in WCW. Now, Nash look, I don't have anything against Nash. I'm just telling the truth, okay? I'm not saying that Kevin Nash is the problem. I've already said who I think the problem is. But Kevin Nash was a guy who didn't really care about WCW. He had booked into his contract the Favored Nations clause, him and Scott Hall. This is not mentioned at all in an episode that features Kevin Nash very heavily, that his contracts were structured in a way that if a talent came in after him, his pay went up. Both him and Scott Hall had that in their contracts. Why would you put that in your contract unless it was all about you? Now, when people talk about Hogan and his creative control and his massive contract, and there's people who are, pulling Hulk Hogan's contract from websites and they're talking about, look at the massive amount of money he was going to make off pay-per-views, off merchandise, etc., etc. Kevin Nash was doing the same thing. And he had the book. So, if you want to blame somebody, Nash is the guy. Now, Bischoff, again, we said that Bischoff was sort of a puppet for Hogan. Well, Nash was a second ventriloquist. If Bischoff was in a corner, Nash was there to help. That's how Nash ended up with the book. He was a trusted guy who was a politician, seasoned politician. Remember, Nash was in WWE. And the Clique was there. And Nash and HBK and X-Pac and all those guys, they were pitching ideas to Vince. So they already knew how to play this game. Nash was ahead of the curve when it comes to politicking. Second only to Hogan, probably. And third, maybe to Randy Savage. But I never heard much about Randy Savage being a politicker. So it'll probably be Hogan, then Nash. All right? So when it comes time to beat Goldberg, we finally looping back around to that. Nash is not the head booker. And he tells people literally all the time, he was not the guy who made the decision to put the belt on himself. But he did pitch the idea. It was their idea to do the taser. Because again, Kevin Sullivan's there. Kevin Sullivan's pitching ideas. They're not listening to him. And I think that they went the right route anyway. Maybe not with the taser, maybe with something else. But I see what Kevin Nash was trying to do. We'll get there in a second. So Nash pitched himself to beat Goldberg. Goldberg is too green. He's too rough. He doesn't know what he's doing. We got to take the belt off of him. Plus, as Nash describes in the documentary, the babyface makes more money in the chase. Which, of course, is not always true because the WWF is a babyface territory. And Hogan drew tons of money as the champion. And so did John Cena. But as a general rule, the babyface should chase as a general rule. So they beat Goldberg. A couple of months later, they do the finger poke of doom. Or a couple of weeks later, they do the finger poke of doom. Nash then defends the finger poke of doom by saying, you want to know why people are so upset about it? Because it got them. And it was that kind of Vince Russo thinking that triggered me to talk about Kevin Nash specifically in this episode. All right? Because you don't have to justify this. You justify the part afterwards. he has always said, he's been consistent with it, that the finger poke of doom, the point of it, was to galvanize the NWO, to reform the NWO as a faction that would then turn around and feud with Goldberg. You put Goldberg in a position where the NWO was fractured and it was weaker than it had been before. You jip Goldberg out of the title, and then the guys reform in order to keep the belt in-house. I 100% understand that. Why you had to do it with the finger poke of doom and you just couldn't do it with Kevin Nash being the guy, I don't understand. Why it had to be Hogan, I don't know. I would imagine it has something to do with Hogan's creative control. But ultimately, re-galvanizing the NWO to fight Goldberg was a smart idea. Goldberg had not had the full NWO experience, similar to Sting and Lex Luger and guys like that. He never had that. So trying to recreate the NWO to fight Goldberg, there was a underlying level of logic to that. To give Goldberg a new experience so that he can grow as a character and give him a stable of villains to fight. Similar to Hulk Hogan and the Heenan family, or Hulk Hogan in the Dungeon of Doom, etc. Roman Reigns in the League of Nations, all scratch that. But you get the idea, right? You want to make the big baby face a bigger baby face. You put him in a hole and then you stack your villains on top of it. This is booking 101. But it was their execution that was absolute crap. It was no good. But the boys hated Goldberg anyway. They didn't like him. He was making a ton of money without paying his dues. Again, he was incredibly rough on them. Of course, they went to Bret Hart, who called Goldberg everything except a child of God and blamed him again for kicking him in the head. Which, if you look at some of the Goldberg botches that they highlighted in the documentary, you will see that a lot of it was positioning. Like when Goldberg whips Scott Hall into the corner, into the ropes. He was far too close to the ropes. When he kicked Bret Hart in the head, again, he was too close to the ropes. Bret didn't even have an opportunity to get his hands up. Now, we all know that Bret worked matches after the Goldberg match. He also banged his head outside the ring, I think either before that or afterwards. So, and he had been working for 20 years before that, so who knows whether that Goldberg kick alone caused the damage to Bret Hart, but he seems to think it did, and a lot of his fans think so too, so it is what it is. But Goldberg was also kind of a dickhead in here. You know, he's tired of apologizing to Bret, which he's been doing for 15 years, 20 years or whatever, and I understand his frustrations. But the idea of what they were trying to do with Goldberg, I get it. It's just that you have a guy who should not be booking the show, especially because he's considered still a talent. And he's an egomaniac to a degree, even though he's very chill. You know, you don't have to be a raving psycho to be an egomaniac. You know, Nash is still very chill and he knows he's a top guy and the money is guaranteed and nothing is going to change. So why not just do whatever I feel like doing? You know, whatever. I'm going to do whatever I want. And the boss is on your side. You know, he trusts you. And Bischoff is in the documentary talking about how he trusts Kevin Nash's instincts and all this kind of stuff. So he had everybody over a barrel. You know. So speaking of Bischoff, we get the big go home for Bischoff. You know, ad revenue is not matching up to the audience size. The executives are kind of pissy. They're putting standards and practices are starting to contact WCW. They want to cut out certain things. They want to tell Bischoff how to do the show, how to rewrite the show. Standards and practices will become a big excuse for like Vince Russo later on. But Bischoff is like, I'm going to fight everybody on this because Ted Turner got my back. Bischoff is getting burnt out, which led to him giving head booking to Kevin Nash while still being there to make sure everything is going to go on fine. Because he was getting into it with standards and practices and the boys are making a ton of money, Bischoff became under suspicion because, well, if you're not going to play ball and do what we tell you to do, we're trying to find some other way of getting rid of you. This is that corporate politics that, you know, people who don't work in offices don't understand. is that sometimes you're under surveillance and you don't even know it. This kinds of stuff happens a lot to people who work in offices. In Bischoff's case, the executives are paying attention to how much money is going out. Why is he paying these guys so much money? They start to assume that he's getting some kind of kickback from these talents. So they started looking for it. They don't find it, clearly, because it's not happening. He's just an idiot who's giving all these guys all this money. And Dr. Harvey Schiller comes clean, tells Bischoff, hey, we've been, making sure you weren't receiving kickbacks from the talent because these guys are making so much money. Offended Bischoff, pissed him off, and he didn't quit, but he stopped caring. Now burnout is completely taken over. And it's not long after that he is formally removed from power. Now, as noted, if you watch the documentary, there is also no discussion about Eric Bischoff becoming an on-screen character, which is also adding to the stress because he's now concerned primarily with his angle and his on-screen performances. Now, he probably would think it's not that big a deal because Vince McMahon's on television and, Vince is primarily concerned with his angles, but it's a little different, just a little different. There's a writing staff and a committee with WWE. There's a booking committee with WCW, but it's not really a welcoming committee in WCW because the executives are, poking around trying to figure out what they can take out of this thing. Bischoff complains about the finances, that different divisions were moving their debt to WCW, making their books look bad. He left out, of course, that Turner was paying some of these contracts, especially some of the guys who would not make the jump to WWE immediately, like Nash, like Hall, like Hogan, like Sting. These guys were making $500,000, $600,000 a year, somewhere in the millions. Turner was paying for that. So it wasn't coming out of WCW's budget. It was mostly coming out of, whatever division of Turner they were signed up with. Okay. So there's pros and cons to this thing. And yes, I understand if you look at a balance sheet, they're offloading so much debt into WCW. To give you a modern example, Endeavor did the same thing when WWE and UFC merged. They offloaded almost $3 billion of debt into TKO. But TKO has the profits to cover it. But you can see that kind of maneuvering in the corporate sphere where you take some of your debt and pass it off. And it hasn't caused a problem for TKO yet, but that's just something that people do. And you notice it sometimes, right? So Bischoff is out. They're going to bring Vince Russo in. That's going to be episode 3. But episode 2 was pretty good. It gave a pretty good synopsis of everything. They're still doing a lot of the jumping around back and forth. They're not giving a lot of solid dates and times and, when did he become the head booker? They didn't even mention that Kevin Nash was the head booker. They just said he was on the committee. Well, he was, technically, but he was already floating around like a fruit fly outside the committee. I mean, Guy Evans is right there. He's in the documentary. You can tell people, hey, Kevin Nash joined the booking committee in January of 1999, and he left it in October of 99, and go through some of the decisions that he helped to make, even though he didn't get to make all of these decisions solo, which is his excuse, and the same excuse Vince Russo used, and the same excuse Bischoff is using, is that, there's a committee, then there's standards and practices, and there's all these other people who are getting involved. I get it. You didn't get to have your pure vision of what you want to have on television, but everything comes with limitations. You have to learn how to work within the limitations given. Now, to give a little sneak peek till next week, I do know that standards and practices, they were ever changing with those kinds of things. They wouldn't give you a list of words you couldn't say. It was mostly a feel. We don't like that. We prefer if you do something else. And it was that ever changing system where you couldn't have any kind of stability. You couldn't set a rhythm. And I understand that from a creative perspective. If somebody continues to edit and re-edit everything that you do, I get it. You get frustrated, you give up, or you stop caring, which is what happened with both Bischoff and Nash. But ultimately, I think it was a good episode. It's still telling the same story we've heard 100 times, but at least it brought some unique elements to it, such as Goldberg talking about his run-in with Scott Hall and how he completely botched that match. And then that was it for Nash, and they decided they got to take the belt off of him. And I liked that they showed the C-SPAN footage of Turner Broadcasting executives actually taking up for WCW, which is rare. You don't hear that a lot, but of course they have to. It's in public. In public, they're going to defend their top product. In private, though, they wanted it gone. All in all, though, pretty good episode. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you guys later.